ivory statue of the god Ganesha, and wondering at the exquisite beauty of the workmanship, the subtle tints of the ivory, the atmosphere of the mystic East which its mere dumb presence suggested and conveyed. It was not a thing of any great size. Its height was some 10 inches, its breadth 6. A cigar box would have held it. And to Thurston, steeped to the lips in the odor and color of the Orient, it represented a world of art and of dreams. He stared at the god. The god stared at him out of a pair of amethyst eyes, cunningly set in the creamy white of the ivory. A strange intoxication stole into Thurston's soul. He heard himself presently talking in a set fashion, calmly, methodically, as though he were in a shop, buying something. He heard his visitor's replies. "You want to sell this?" "Yes, sir, I want to sell it. And I'll tell you how I came by it, too, Mr. Thurston. All's above board, and Mr. Evans knows me well. He knew me before I fell on hard times. It's this way, sir. My father was in the army at the time of the mutiny, and he saw a good deal of fighting out in India, Delhi, and Lucknow, and elsewhere. And he brought home a good many curiosities, and that image amongst them. It's the image of some Hindu god, so I'm told, and of course anybody can see the workmanship is excellent. My father gave it to me on his deathbed, and charged me never to part with it, because there's some legend about its bringing luck with it. But it's brought me no luck," continued Thurston's visitor, with a dismal laugh. "I've been down on my luck for some time. However, it will bring luck if you're agreeable to buy it, sir, and perhaps that's where the luck comes in." "Well, sir, I of course don't know anything about these matters. I was recommended to take the carving to Mr. Evanson," said the man, "and he advised me to see you. I should be quite satisfied to take what he said he thought it was worth." "What was that?" said Thurston. "£20, sir." The man uttered these words with some anxiety, and his eyes fastened themselves on Thurston's face, as if to watch the effect. Thurston, however, was still fascinated by the ivory god, and neither eyes nor lips betrayed anything. He remained silent for some moments. At last he started, as from a reverie. "I am quite prepared to accept Mr. Evanson's estimate of the carving's value," he said. "I will give you £20 for it." The man bowed his untidy head, and sighed deeply. It was evident that the prospect of immediate possession of £20 was very grateful to him. "Thank you, sir," he said. Thurston went over to his desk, unlocked a cash drawer, and produced a cash box, which, on examination, proved to contain £22 notes and gold. He counted out 20 to his visitor, put £2 in his own pocket, restored the depleted cash box to its drawer and locked it up again, and then, asking the vendor his name and address, wrote out a formal receipt. 5 minutes later the unkempt person was descending the stairs, happy in the possession of a small fortune, and Thurston was left alone with the ivory god. The clanging of the street door, far below, plunged the house into a weird silence. In its midst Thurston sighed deeply. There was a strange feeling within him that he had suddenly come into possession of something which he had been wanting all his life. It was akin to the feeling of the lover to whom the much desired object of affection is at last given. When the stranger first unwrapped the ivory god and revealed its strange charms to his eyes, Thurston became aware of a sense of satisfaction. This sense was now increasing to a point of something like delight. He drew in his nether lip, and began to utter a soft, sibilant sound, not unlike the purring of a cat. Not for many years had he experienced such a keen feeling of pleasure as that which now filled him. He began looking about him for a suitable place wherein to enshrine his new acquisition. He glanced at the chimney piece, already ornamented profusely with carvings from China, Japan, and India, with stones and vases from Peru, and he turned away dissatisfied. The ivory god, he said to himself, must have a better setting than the chimney piece offered. He wanted to have it near him while he wrote. There was something in the lines, in the dull white of the ivory, in the subtle purple tints of the amethyst eyes, which bade fair to soothe and to fascinate. He wanted to have the ivory god upon his desk. Looking about the room, he caught sight of the little triptych which he had bought years ago in Venice, admiring it more for the fineness of its wood and the carving than for the elementary art of the figure of Christ which was placed in the center niche. Its dark wood, he thought, would make an admirable setting for the pallid tint of the ivory, and without hesitation he took it down from the wall, wrenched away the crucifix from the middle compartment, and installed the figure of the Hindu god in its place. Then he placed the triptych on the ledge above his desk, and stood back from it, admiring the bizarre effect. The amethyst eyes of the ivory god seemed to smile into his own. Thurston tore himself away from his treasure at last and went out to dine. He walked through the gloom of the badly lighted London streets until he came to the quiet restaurant wherein a certain corner table had come to be almost sacred to him. He ate and drank mechanically and sparingly. A small quantity of plainly cooked food satisfied him at all times. He drank no wine or spirits or ale. After dinner he smoked a cigarette to the accompaniment of a cup of coffee and glanced over his evening newspaper, handed to him by a waiter who knew him for an old and regular customer. Altogether he spent an hour at the restaurant, and on this particular evening there was an itching desire within him all the time to get back to his rooms. He wanted to examine the ivory god again, to look at it, to wonder about it. It was with a feeling of relief and of anticipation of coming pleasure that he finally paid his bill and went quickly away. Thurston shut himself into his room with a great sense of satisfaction. He was alone in the midst of 5 millions of people, alone with the only things for which he cared, his books and his curiosities. Other men might dine and wine, go to theaters, balls, social functions. He cared for none of these things. He knew joys which were far deeper, far better worth having, and he could command their presence whenever he pleased to do so. So he fastened his outer door, drew a warm curtain over the inner one, turned up his lamp, stirred his fire, and looked round about him with a sense of comfort. He saw the ivory god shining in the triptych above his desk. He caught the gleam of its amethyst eyes, and he was once more aware of the feeling that it in some strange way rounded off his life. He was glad to have it, and to see it there, sitting above his altar like a presiding deity. Thurston's next proceedings were significant and explanatory. He divested himself of his overcoat and of the smartish morning coat beneath it. He slipped into an old velvet jacket of undoubted antiquity, and, that done, he exchanged his boots for a comfortable and well-worn pair of slippers. And then, having made sure of his preliminaries, he unlocked a cupboard and produced a small decanter of curious shape, half filled with a golden brown liquid, which seemed to sparkle and coruscate in the lamplight. He set it on the table in the center of the room, placed a glass of singular beauty, a deep crystal bowl set in twisted columns, at its side, and proceeded to heat water in the kettle. When the water was heated, he made a careful mixture of it and the golden brown liquid in the glass, and after that he curled himself up in an easy chair facing the ivory god, with the glass and the decanter at his side. Thurston had become a slave to the opium habit. Beginning the use of that attractive and insidious drug as a cure for some slight complaint, he had increased his doses until at 27 he made no excuses to himself for consuming it in large quantities. During the day he took it in the form of pills, each containing a few grains. At night, following the example of De Quincey, he indulged in laudanum negus, sometimes sitting up until the gray of the morning broke in upon his dreams and fantasies. He had long since relinquished all thought of giving up the habit. It had destroyed his moral courage once and for all, and had taken complete possession of him, mentally and physically. Under the influence of opium he was indifferent to everything in the world, and it was rarely that its influence was not upon him. As the subtle charm of the drug stole through his brain, Thurston yielded himself up to the dreams which it induced. His eyes were fixed on the ivory god. He began to speculate on its history, on the strange things which those amethyst eyes must have seen, on the deeds of blood, the mystic panorama of Eastern life, with its gorgeous coloring, its strange suggestion, which they must have watched unmoved. The phantasmagoria of 100 worlds began to float, and finally to crystallize before him. In his estimation the carving was hundreds